Hi, the date is the 3rd of June 2026, and for this video, I want to talk about my dopamine addiction and how I'm approaching that. Because I've been addicted to dopamine for pretty much most of my life, and it I see other people who don't struggle with it as much, and I wish I was like them, but I don't know if it's my brain chemistry. Some people call it ADHD. But the fact is that's something I struggle with a lot, and that's something I see people struggle with a lot. So I have been processing it a lot, and I want to raise an idea that might be a good way of handling dopamine addiction that works better than most of the alternative ways. So the first thing is your environment. So when I say your environment, I'm talking about the things that make it easy for you to fall into that addiction. And I'm not talking about the basic environment stuff like having the app on your phone, putting a screen time limit on it. I'm talking about the unavoidable things. Sometimes you'll come home and you'll have had a hard day at work. That's just life. And that is when you are vulnerable to go on these things. And not having it on your phone, it's just too accessible. You can search it up. You can search it up on the internet. You can go on to, you can re-download the app. You can unlock the screen time. But like these weak points are inevitable, and you think like, okay, I've had a hard day. I'm going to be compassionate to myself and like um no one's been kind to me, so I'm going to be kind to myself and allow myself to indulge. But there's a difference between coping and processing. And I think that's where the big difference between how you handle hardships and how you handle the stress and all the energy people throw at you, like especially at a hard job. One of the main things is giving yourself the space to process those emotions, to process that energy, instead of coping with that energy. Because when you're coping with it, you're kind of in a position where you're vulnerable to the law of opposites. So when you indulge, your dopamine will go up, but then it will go back down. And people go through this cycle because it works. It's a valid cycle. It helps you cope. It helps you cope through the bad times and pulls you up. And then when you go back down, you're back in the good times. Or the normal times. So even though your dopamine is lower, you've kind of already coped with all the energy or all the rubbish you had to deal with at work. But I'd like to raise a different idea, because that's not really sustainable. Just falling into that cycle every time you have a hard path or something. I've been reading a lot about presence, and what I've learned is there's a state, like a peace of mind you can be in, and this gets easy to be in when you're meditating. And unlike, it's called, I guess you could call it being present or being at peace, or when you're just there processing what you're feeling. So I guess it's not really being at peace as much as processing your emotions in the moment. And as dopamine goes up and it has to come down, this kind of stillness, this mental stillness, or this mental processing is kind of just a state of being. It's just how you are. So instead of up and down, it's more like entry and exit. And if we have the need to cope with our stuff, then we're not always processing it, which means we are not in that state of processing. So 90% of the time, we're not in that state of processing our emotions, but we can enter that state instead of coping. And I think that's the difference, especially with me personally, because what I will do is I'll intellectualize the problem. And then I'll solve the problem. But the thing that made me feel bad still happened. So even though I've solved the problem, so it won't make me feel bad again, I still have that emotion I need to feel. And you can't just cope with that emotion through dopamine and that. And you act like, okay, I've done really hard work, or I had to go through this, so it's okay if I let myself indulge. But that's just causing more damage overall. And you don't need willpower. You just need to feel. You just need to process. It's not you need to do something productive. It's you need to give yourself space, maybe through meditation, maybe through just sitting there, maybe through taking a moment. And I think that's what compassion really is. Compassion is allowing yourself to have those emotions instead of just coping with them until they go away. And that's why I think that actually treating yourself with compassion is more giving yourself space to process those instead of coping them. Yeah. I think breaking the cycle, because let's say you do have something go wrong, and then you feel bad, and then you go on dopamine to cope with your emotions, and then you solve the problem, and you're like, okay, I've solved the issue, what made me feel bad, it's okay for me to go on electronics or whatever gives you dopamine, smoking maybe. I think that is another way to get back in the cycle, is feeling bad about the cycle. So instead of, and I think you see that a lot on the internet, you'll see a lot of stuff shaming people about their scrolling habits or their dopamine habits. But I think that shame is another one of those bad emotions that you don't really want to process. And instead, there's other ways to cope, like going to the gym. You feel the shame of your body, so instead of just feeling that and processing that emotion, you can go to the gym and get a nicer body, which is, I don't want to say that's coping, but that's kind of what it is. So, yeah, to kind of summarize, there's the cycle, which is any emotion ever. Then there's, and even when people throw energy at you, it's just all, you have to process it. You have to take a moment. And nowadays I see it in a lot of people. Their taking a moment is indulging, when it would be much more beneficial just to process that. And I am personally doing it a lot, and I was very addicted to YouTube and the dopamine and other forms of dopamine. And then I've hopped off it today, and I felt very shameful. And I need to process these emotions of shame. And the first thing that comes up is I want to go back on YouTube. I solved the problem, which is this video, this is solving the problem. I know how to solve the problem, so I'm going to let myself indulge so it doesn't happen again. But the thing that needs to pull me out of that cycle is to actually process it. And other things can bring up that emotion when you're in this state. So I may feel shame about overusing my dopamine, but now that I have low motivation, I might need to do the dishes. And now I feel shame about not doing the dishes. So that's more I have to process. So it's just about taking a moment, taking like 5 minutes or however you process it. For me personally, it's either through meditation or doing a little bit of reading or going on a walk, feeling what I'm feeling, not denying it, not trying to push it away, not trying to be productive, just feeling it, and then moving on. and recognizing when I feel these emotions again. Yeah. So this has been a bit of a long video, but I think it's a good topic that needs to be covered. And yeah, that's probably the end of the video.